So welcome back to the channel, and today, as you can see, I am previewing the Chicago Bears 2020 season. So I hope you enjoy the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Let's get into it. So just thinking back to the 2019 season really quickly, it was kind of disappointing for them. There was so much promise in 2018, so to then go 8-8 in 2019 was very disappointing for them. It was Matt Nagy's second season, and they finished third in the division, which, as I said, was disappointing. But the Vikings and the Packers did both play very well last year. They both made playoff runs, but Matt Nagy will certainly have his eyes on certain players to step up in 2020 that maybe haven't done so over the last couple of years. No names mentioned. So looking towards the roster and the most important position, the quarterback. And this is a big talking point around the Chicago Bears and who's going to be starting, who's going to do what. So first I'll look at Mitch Trubisky. I mean, where do we start with him? For me, personally, I don't think he's the quarterback of the future for the Bears. I did a boom or bust video. I actually put him in the bust category. I'll link that above now. But, you know, he's not a complete bust. He's not the worst quarterback in the NFL by any stretch of the imagination. Don't get me wrong. He is not absolutely appalling, but I really don't know why he's so inconsistent. Some weeks he'll come out with throw great passes, be really accurate, throw for 3 or 4 touchdowns, and other weeks he'll come out and be Winston's clone. So, you know, I honestly don't know how he's going to go, but I'd say that there is some promise there. But he's definitely not the quarterback of the future for me. You know, he threw for 17 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and 3,100 yards, which is slightly less than 2018. His quarterback rating went down a little bit last year. But what kind of prevents me from being overly negative on him is the fact that the weapons he's got surrounding him are nowhere near as good as other teams. The offensive line has been pretty shocking, to be honest, and he's had, you know, injuries around him, whereas other quarterbacks, like Deshaun Watson and stuff, they haven't had those kind of problems to deal with. So that's what prevents me from being, you know, too negative on Mitch Trubisky. But overall, I still really don't see a ton of potential in him. And then obviously you've got the other quarterback, Nick Foles, that they brought in from the Jacksonville Jaguars in the trade. But no one knows as to what kind of capacity that Nick Foles is coming into the organisation. Is he going to come and provide, you know, really good backup to Mitch Trubisky? Is he going to start to make Trubisky, you know, consider his performances and realise that he needs to play better? No one really knows, but it's an interesting one, and we'll definitely have to keep an eye on it and see how it plays out. So quick look towards the running backs, and both of them look really good. You've got Montgomery and Tarik Cohen. They worked really well in 2019 together, 1,700 all-purpose yards. So they really work well in tandem together, and I've got no you know, worries about them coming into 2020. I think they'll perform well again. Then the tight ends. I am kind of specifically looking towards the Chicago Bears tight ends in 2020 as two players that I've kind of got my eye on. I really like seeing good tight end play. And Jimmy Graham was criminally underused by Aaron Rodgers because, you know, it's been proven statistically that he doesn't really use his tight ends as much as other quarterbacks in the league. So he's a quality addition. And then Kmet was clearly by far and away the best tight end in this 2020 draft class. So I'm looking forward to seeing these two in tandem together and how they work out this year. And then with the wide receivers, you've got Allen Robinson. He is very, very underrated across the NFL. He's had a couple of problems with injuries where he's, you know, had a couple of matches that he's missed here and there. But on the whole, he's a really good player, and he is a player that I would definitely look to try and get in your fantasy teams if you don't already. Thank me later. So he actually racked up 1,100 receiving yards last year, and he was accompanied by Anthony Miller. He had 650 receiving yards, and that was only in 7 games. So if he could have stayed fit, life would have been a lot easier for Mitch Trubisky. But, you know, that's the way it goes. Injuries happen in the NFL. Has to be a next man up culture. But unfortunately, the Bears couldn't quite have as much production as they were hoping. Taylor Gabriel came and provided a few yards, but overall, they weren't really amazing in the wide receiver depth last year. So, you know, that's something that I'd look to see try and improve in 2020. If they can keep all of the wide receivers fit, they might be in with a shout of doing something fairly good on offense. And then their wide receiver 3, Ted Ginn Jr. I think this is quite a good pickup. They didn't spend an awful lot of money to bring him in, so to have him as a wide receiver 3, I think is a really nice move from the Chicago Bears. Provides a bit more depth, some experience to the side, so I like the move. Then thinking about the offensive line, as I mentioned, it was quite frankly awful in 2019. They had the 4th quickest average sack time from sack to snap. So, you know, they were letting that pressure come through so quick on Mitch Trubisky. He didn't have a chance to do anything with it. And he was sacked 38 times in 2019. But they have added the right guard, Ifedi, who's come from the Seahawks, to strengthen that position. But otherwise, all of the other starters return. So, you know, potentially team cohesion improves and the offensive line are more used to working together. So potentially we see an improvement in that for 2020. But they will definitely need to improve on the offensive line if they're going to do anything in 2020. But you simply can't achieve anything with that much success and that short a time of snap to being sacked. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. So let me know, who do you think will be the best player on offense for the Chicago Bears in 2020? So then looking towards the defense, and this is another massive area that needs to be stepped up if they've got any ambitions of success in 2020, and this is the pass rush. So in 2019, they had the 9th least sacks in the league, despite having some of the most dangerous edge rushers in all of the NFL. Their run D was 9th best, though, in terms of yards allowed per game average, so this is a big positive. So obviously, they've got one very good aspect on the D-line and one not so good, so if they can just balance that up and be fairly good on both of them, then they'll be alright. Obviously, it didn't help that Akiem Hicks only played 5 games due to injury last year. He's normally very, very dominant up the middle, but Eddie Goldman played quite well at the defensive tackle spot, and Bilal Nichols will definitely need to step up on the edge for 2020. But then moving on to the linebackers now, arguably the most talented players on all of the Bears roster. You've got Khalil, Mack and Floyd in 2019, who are pass rushing and dropping into coverage really nicely. But Floyd's moved on, and now you've got Robert Quinn coming in from the Cowboys, the outside linebacker. And I think this is a really good move. He can be very, very productive. I think the scheme will fit him well. And then you combine, obviously, Mack and Robert Quinn on the outside pass rushing, and you've got Danny Trevathan and Roquan Smith in the middle, who are both really good inside linebackers, a good mix of experience and youthfulness, and they performed pretty well in 2019 together, so I'd expect those two to play well again in 2020. So then the secondary spot looks very promising. They've had a lot of movement in and out in the secondary over the off-season. So they let Prince Amukamara and Clinton Dix walk, but then they brought in Jalen Johnson from Utah in the 2020 NFL Draft. Very promising, great speed, great reach. He likes to make a lot of plays on the ball. I do really like Jalen Johnson. I think maybe his draft stock was only a little bit lower because he's come from Utah in the Pac-12, but if he went to an SEC school, he would definitely be a first-round pick, I think, or close to it. But anyway, he's a good pick for me. And then combine that with Buster Skrine, Kyle Fuller, Eddie Jackson, who's a perennial Pro Bowler, and then you've got Gibson, who's come in at strong safety. PFF ranked the secondary group as 12th overall in 2019, so it'll be interesting to see how all of these changes kind of affect them going into 2020. So then just a quick look towards the coaching team for 2020. You've got Matt Nagy. He had his good first season, and then last season was disappointed, as I mentioned. He'll be looking for a big response in 2020. He's worked with the Eagles and the Chiefs in various offensive roles. And then you've got defensive coordinator Chuck Pagano. He was with the Colts as their head coach for a number of years, since 2012. He's had multiple jobs in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball, and he'll look to try and get more out of the defense in 2020 because he's got all the weapons there. They just need to perform a little bit better. So the Chicago Bears schedule in 2020 is tied 13th hardest based on win percentage from last season. Their hardest games come against the Packers and Vikings, obviously being divisional rivals. They play them home and away. And then they also host the Saints and the Chiefs, and they go on the road to the Broncos and the Eagles. So there's definitely some tough trips there, but probably fairly middle of the road when you compare it to other schedules. So then their transactions over the 2020 offseason, obviously I've mentioned the trade that they made with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They gave away the 5th round pick, and they received Nick Foles in return, who we don't know what capacity in, but he's a good quarterback on his day. Then in the draft, obviously, the Chicago Bears still don't have a first-round pick for this year due to the Khalil Mack Raiders trade. But Jalen Johnson and Kmet both came in the second round, who I've already mentioned. 2 really good players in positions of need, which is obviously what you got to do when you're not blessed with tons of cap room. You got to draft the best players in the positions of most need. So they've done a good job with that. And then the only other real notable pick that they had from the draft was Mooney at wide receiver. He could be a contributor, but I think he'll mostly find himself on special teams in 2020. In free agency, they had a number of big names coming and going. Going out the door, they had Prince Amukamara, the cornerback, Leonard Floyd, outside linebacker, Clinton Dix, Kwiatkowski, and Trey Burton all left. But then coming in, I do really like the moves that they brought in, bringing in Jimmy Graham, Ted Ginn, Tashawn Gibson, Jermaine Ifedi, and Robert Quinn from the Cowboys. So I do really like the moves. I think they've replaced all of the positions that they've lost players in really well. I think they've actually spent a little bit more cap space than what they were using before. I think there's definitely some upgrades at those positions when you look at the players coming in. So I think they've done a nice job there. And then just other bit of business, they re-signed Danny Trevathan through 2022, but they declined Trubisky's 5th-year option a few weeks ago. So it's a big contract year for him. So all eyes will be on what he can do in 2020 to prove himself. So let me know what you think the Chicago Bears' best bit of business in the 2020 offseason was. Potentially the draft, free agency? Who do you think will make the biggest difference? So overall in 2020, I think the Bears could struggle on the offensive line again, potentially making life hard for Trubisky or Foles, whoever's in there. But overall, they have a pretty good roster and the schedule is fairly average. So I would say that their floor for 2020 is 6-10 if they really can't protect the quarterback better and if there are more injuries at wide receiver again. But on the other hand, if a Fedi improves the offensive line dramatically and they can really protect the quarterback back there and they can stay fairly healthy, then I can definitely see the Chicago Bears getting up to an 11-5 record and making the playoffs. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe for more content. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.